The current state of the economic crisis reignites questions about Ghana's economic governance. Critics of government are of the view that widespread corruption, insatiable thirst for borrowing, large size of government and incompetence have combined to unleash an economic crisis, driving cost of living on an upward trajectory and pushing a significant number of Ghanaians into a vicious cycle of poverty. Government, on the contrary, believes it is on the track to transform the socio-economic fortunes of Ghanaians, insisting that the current economic meltdown is driven by primarily external factors. What alternative policy options are on the menu of Ghana's leading opposition party, the National Democratic Congress? Welcome to Tough Jaw with me, Judith Awoche Tando. Today I have in my presence the special aide to former President John Dramani Mahama in the person of lawyer Joyce Bawah Mogtari. Welcome to Tough Jaw.
Pleasure to meet you, Tracy.
Pleasure to meet you too. Let's start with this. What's your assessment of the current economy and governance system?
Tracy, is there an economy? I doubt there's even a government system. I'm sure if you've been following events in Parliament presently, for yesterday and today, you'll find that even after they presented the now infamous 2023 budget, there's fewer than 30 majority MPs in Parliament. So it tells you that the government has totally lost control. And so you wonder whether there's anything such as an economy or even a government. I personally think that there's a total failure in the system.
Well, some spokesperson of the current government, for instance, Energy Minister Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, once said that there's no longer doing so as was in the past during your governance. What do you say about that?
You know, I think that when you make these sorts of flimsy excuses, it just tells you the sorts of people who are currently walking the walls of power or the corridors of power. Indeed, if indeed under the circumstances where we have food inflation as high as over 100%, we have the city at the lowest. We have been further downgraded now to junk status. And so there really is no economy to speak of. And beyond belaboring the point, let me state categorically that John Dramani Mahama and the MDC fixed the power distribution challenges long before we left office. It was always a challenge about depending largely on the Akosombo Dam or Mbui Dam, which is the thermal projects that we used to have. The whole idea really was to move from the hydro to thermal systems so that at least we could have a good or fair balance. And so with the entry of independent power producers, so also ended Ghana's challenges with power distribution.
Well, government has time and time again said that this economic crisis is basically due to the COVID pandemic as well as the Russia-Ukraine war. What's your assertion with that?
Well, you know, I think that we currently have a government of liars, a government that refuses to take responsibility, a government that pays lip service to just about every responsibility that has actually been bequeathed onto them. And I believe we all also know that just before even COVID hit, we knew that the economy was already in tatters. You know, the challenge with this economy is not that there's anything that they could not have done. It is in the lack of discipline. It is in the lack of capacity, basically. You can call it incompetence. Because at the time when they were borrowing, everybody knew then that they were borrowing at an unsustainable level. Indeed, at the recent World Bank meetings even, Ghana was cautioned to enter into a sort of arrangement where they will be able to stem their debt spiraling out of control. We declined. We were advised to enter an IMF program very quickly. We declined. Indeed, our solution to our insolvency was for us to go and introduce an electronic levy system. What happened? It was just to tax the poor, to feed fat on government's own vanity and waste.
That brings me to my next question. Of course, the MPs, even the majority MPs in Parliament called for his head, that's the finance minister's head. Any specific individuals, apart from the finance minister, who you blame for the current economic crisis, do you think that the president himself should be removed from office?
You know, they say in our local parlance that before the fish starts to rot, it starts from the head. So by the time you get to the tail, you know that the stench will be so high that you can possibly not eat it. I believe strongly that in terms of what has gone on, the failure in leadership should be laid directly at the doorstep of President Akufo-Addo. The failure in Ghanaians to see any form of positive improvement in their lives should be blamed absolutely on President Akufo-Addo. Indeed, his inability to account to the good people of Ghana fully for his stewardship is one of them. His failure to fight corruption, this canker that has taken center stage, is another. Recently, we've seen a video put out by ANAS, the same principle that then candidate Akufo-Addo promised to utilize fully to fight corruption, catching a whole deputy finance minister with his fingers in the cookie jar. What has happened to him? So far, we've heard nothing, short of that lame attempt asking for an investigation to be carried out. Where is he today? Has he been asked any questions? Has he been hauled before any committee? Has he been invited to any hearing? Has there been any investigation at the seat of government? There's been absolutely nothing. So yes, we are dealing with an inflation rate of over 44%. We're dealing with the highest food inflation at over 100%. We're dealing with also challenges. And yet we have a president who refuses even to see reason. I expect that by now there should be a huge reshuffle.
Okay, so you talked about issues on corruption, the inflation rate, a lot of things that the current government is currently doing that is causing a lot of economic crisis. But if you want to refer to the ISS report during 2015, of course, you talked about the fact that Dumsor was solved. But here's a case where Dumsor cost about $924 million. That is in just 2014 alone. And for corrupt acts, there were quite a number also during your time as the NDC in government. Why should Ghanaians believe in bringing back an NDC government into power?
First and foremost, I'm sure that in most of the circumstances that you largely refer to, Ghanaians probably have observed that under the erstwhile NDC administration, every effort was made to fix themselves. Considering the emergency nature of it, considering the exigency of the day, note also that so far, nobody has been able to come and argue with the cost of the independent power producers. Not one document. Indeed, for all the audit reports that they posited and claimed they were going to undertake, none of them have shown any wrongdoing. Indeed, in recent times, the Africa report has actually celebrated Ghanaians, and Ghana in particular, for investing in these independent power producing companies. And the fact that currently Ghana has a surplus of power instead of the deficit that we used to experience. So that's one. Secondly, note that on all the infrastructure that the visionary John Dramani Mahama and the NDC invested in, we have actually been validated on each and every one of them. The University of Ghana Medical Hospital facility is a great example. Once COVID hit, what were we told? We were told then that it would be open for use. Until then, people were actually even convinced that the facility wasn't ready. Two, it could not be operationalized. In recent times, I've followed a conversation where it has now become a research center for medical science and scientists to work for, because it is one of the best equipped in this country. And that is also a testament to the vision of John Dramani Mahama, and of course, with the support of the NDC. Note it was a project that was started under Professor John Evans Atta-Mills, who had been a lecturer on that campus for many years. So you see, it is not in the conversations that we refuse to have. It is also sometimes in the way we pretend not to notice the differences between the two groups. Indeed, when you speak even in our time, where there were acts of malfeasance, the government itself would undertake investigations. And there were ministers who were sacked. Don't forget even that at the time, no minister was allowed to stay in office if there were complaints about graft or malfeasance. Indeed, we lost quite a number of our very good ministers because of some of these complaints. But you see, what we are experiencing now is that the same people who touted themselves as persons who were willing to go the full hog to fight corruption have been found woefully inadequate.
Well, the NPP says it has the men. They've constantly said that. What would the NDC have done differently if they're in power during this period?
Let me first categorically state that I'm not even sure that they have any men or women for that matter. That if they had any men or women, maybe there were some boys and girls. I'm not even sure what those boys and girls are capable of doing. Indeed, they referred to people living in government at the time as nincompoops. Now we all know who the nincompoops are. They mentioned incompetence and who was the incompetent one and all of that. We now know that the walking, talking incompetent is what is in the office now. I believe strongly, and I believe that President Mahama spoke at length about this matter. First and foremost will be discipline. Fiscal discipline and discipline in terms of spending. An absolute slimming down of government machinery. Next will be to ensure that we reduce the bureaucracy. Look at the number of ministries. Look at the work we achieved at the transport ministry when it was just one ministry. Now we have aviation, we have our railways, and what are they doing? They literally have inherited the projects that we left behind, and they're the same things they're implementing. If there's one new project that has come on board, in the Ministry of Transport, which I know quite well, tell me.
Okay, well, I saw you refer to Mahama's speech at the UPSA on bringing back or saving Ghana. What are the key policy options driving his proposals?
Well, first and foremost, what is it that drives our economy? It is a stabilization of the city. How do you stabilize a city? It is that you must improve upon what? Industries. You must reduce imports of certain key commodities. You must also ensure that corruption is one of the biggest challenges in this country. It is one of the clearest signs of why we cannot sustain the economic improvements that we keep making. It is also the reason why Akufo-Addo has eroded all the gains that were made before he came into office. Note that for the quantum of oil proceeds that they have received, they cannot even fully and independently fund free SHS.
Okay, so let's talk about parliaments now. Would you say a hung parliament as we have now has hindered governance or helped it in any way?
Oh, I think I'll give all the credit to the minority in terms of numbers, in terms of the fact that we currently are experiencing a hung parliament in the 8th parliament. I think that the minority has done a yeoman's job. Because of the nature of the parliament, they have been able to smoke out government and especially the majority side. They have also been able to hold them even more accountable than they would otherwise be able to. Note that if the majority had the numbers, they will literally bulldoze their way, they will bully their way, and they would, use all the tricks available to ensure that they survive. But you can see right from the days of the cash for seats inquiry, right to the days of the PDS inquiry, right to the days of the COVID-19 inquiry, in fact, to the latest motion on censure of our finance minister. It tells you the only reason we have arrived here is because of the peculiar nature of the parliament.
But well, for instance, when it came to the appointment of ministers, we know that the minority had already expressed their displeasure in the finance minister who is currently in office. But when it got to the time to appoint him, we saw them appoint him.
But note that, for example, at the time, the numbers were still in favor of the NPP, even though it was not such a large majority. But what happened even at the time, if you remember, we have never seen a more hotly contested vetting process in the history of this country. If you note, the finance minister in particular had a very difficult time going through the vetting process. Indeed, when you stem the vetting of ministers or you refuse to confirm ministers, you are literally holding the government to ransom. So at the time, even though they had gone to this very vigorous vetting, a few of them were asked to come back to clarify certain issues, to respond to matters that have been raised by petitioners from the general public.
What about the e-levy? It was also passed after a lot of...
But you could tell that with the e-levy, if the minority had this way, there's no way we would have an e-levy. They went all the way and up. But like I said, if government is insistent on taking the wrong decisions, why not?
What about the Speaker of Parliament? What's your assessment of his tenure?
Well, I think that Right Honourable Speaker Bagbin is a fantastic hand. He's a very experienced member of Parliament. He has actually paid his dues to Parliament. And I believe that in his time as Speaker, he has served as a good facilitator, a good moderator. He has tried very hard to remain unbiased, especially towards the minority group. And I believe that he has also brought his experience to bear largely on the processes of Parliament. I think that we ought to acknowledge and give respect where it's due.
Still on issues of the e-levy, you'd quite remember that we saw a person of Gabi Ochidaku visiting President Mahama right after that levy was passed. Would you say that he was compromising anyway.
Well, that's not possible. You know, it is only in our part of the world that partisanship has reduced us almost to the point of being enemies. In other countries, when you have such difficult decisions, normally what you would see is that the president would even reach out to other stakeholders. Other presidents who are alive. Recently, we've seen it in the midterm elections in the US, where President Biden has reached out to President Obama, who has come out fully to support candidates in the races for the Democratic Party. Indeed, if President Clinton were strong enough, I'm sure he'd be on the trail as well with all of them. So there is a certain beautiful aspect to democracy, despite our differences.
What would be your ideal number of ministers that should be in power if you were in government?
You know, this is a question that I have not actually sought the thoughts of my boss on. But I know that he has actually advocated for them to slim down government first and foremost. Note that it is also imperative that in times such as these, look, we have a ministry that has about 3 deputies. What are they all doing? I served as a deputy minister. And in all sincerity, I don't think I even operated at about 60% of my capacity as someone who had served as a director at the highest level of a government agency prior to becoming a deputy minister. And I'm being very honest. I cannot in any way fathom how the transport ministry can have 3 deputy ministers, for example. So these are matters that are things we can't deal with. And then sometimes you ask, when you have special initiatives, who benefits from those special initiatives? When you have an unemployment insurance, for example, who benefits from it? When NAPCO people are singing that they haven't been paid, teachers haven't been paid, nurses haven't been paid their full allowances.
Well, the teachers and nurses also went through a lot during your time. I mean, nurses, unemployment, a lot of them were also facing the same challenges they're facing now.
What was the reasons why we continue to build additional hospital facilities? Why did we stop the feeding allocations, which was a very small stipend? It was so that we could encourage more training of additional numbers. Because if you have higher numbers in the training colleges, it means then that feeding them will become difficult. I'm sure you've heard today that they said that school feeding should be increased from 1 cedi to 5 cedis. Imagine your child being at school and being fed on 1 Ghana cedi. What does that sound like? What does that look like? So you can't, in the times that we speak of, note that the dollar was what? Was negligible. That we had inflation which was not even up to even 35%. That the dollar to the cedi at the time they were screaming above the rooftops, especially then candidate Baumia. So you see, let's put the conversation in proper context and note that some of the reasons why Ghanaians actually went out there to endorse their policies was because they told so many lies. 6 years down the line, what are we seeing? They even refused to take responsibility. They refused to apologize. They refused even to accept that they failed. And we now have a vice president who is totally hidden from public view and sending out all these strange statements. Indeed, that conversation about gold for oil is one of the biggest scams that I have ever heard. It will take some stakeholder engagement. We have mining contracts currently with huge mining firms that pay huge corporate taxes to the state. So how are you going to then take the gold from those companies?
And you just said that we should ask you how.
Yes, ask us how.
If you make a promise.
Yes, ask us how.
So let me ask you how.
Yeah.
How is the NDC in this current economic crisis going to take us out?
To cut costs. That's first. On any project that is not necessary. Cut all vanity projects. So make what we have more efficient. So if we have current infrastructure in terms of health infrastructure and facilities, make them more efficient. That's one. Because you see, if you run things efficiently, you reduce waste. Secondly, watch procurement. Unnecessary procurement, needless procurement, we ought not to go on. Thirdly, we must be sure that sole sourcing, which is one of the things they campaigned on, go and cross-check in terms of the numbers, the levels. We've heard how even the cathedral was paid over 400 million for a project that never went through any processes. And there are many others like
about
that.
Taxes?
Taxes currently. Remember that one of the biggest things that propelled President Akufo-Addo to the level where he is today was his protest against the introduction of VAT.
Yeah.
And even at the time, strongman Jerry Rawlings pulled out and went for further consultations and then came back. Today, look at where VAT is. We have the e-levy. We have the COVID-19 levy. Years after COVID, we're still taking that levy. We have the sanitation tax. And look at the insanitary conditions in which we all live.
Would you scrap all those taxes?
We can make them better. Look, one of the main things that I believe is the reason why we are where we are is that we are not even collecting effectively. Check the road tolls. Go across the world. Everywhere in this world, road tolls form a very key component of funding for improvement to our road infrastructure. Look at the haphazard way that a minister could just walk into a space and shout that the road tolls have been removed. And then suddenly look at the attempts to bring it back. So you see, you ought to hold your government accountable.
But how are you going to make the taxes better? You said you were going to make it better. How?
Effective and efficient collection first and foremost. You see, check the numbers of properties across this country. Have you ever thought about the management fees that go to all these companies that we go and engage for these services? Can you imagine that we put all of our students coming out of university to go out there, enumerate properties, tax them according to size, according to location, and all of that, and be sure that the monies actually go where they're supposed to go? I have never seen a country, and I'm speaking to this as a very personal matter, where we have expended so much on automation, on technology, even now that we are digitalizing and all that. And you read the report that Ghana's attempt even to provide digital addresses to homes is one of the biggest failures in our current history. Because that was certainly not a solution. What's the point if you put a digital address on someone's wall and you have no way of tracing it or tracking it?
So is the NDC against the digitalization?
The NDC had actually started the process of providing street names, if you remember, as a way of guiding people to even find various locations across the country. Nothing beats being able to label access roads, because that is the first step to even being able to identify and recognize the place. Look at the stories about corruption. I say that every day. Go and compare, do your own analysis. Even in terms of quantum, how can you have a whole PPA CEO himself who had given evidence against Madame Charlotte for actually breaches of procurement processes at the time? He was a star witness for government, currently today being tried by the OSP for his own iniquities. This is the government that we have. And I believe that majority of them should be on trial for waste, for lack of ethics, for breaches of various transactional whatevers, even for conflict of interest situations. And don't be deceived by what they say. The finance minister as an individual is mulcted in conflict of interest, and so are many of them. And I believe strongly that Honorable Edu Aboagye ought to be put before court.
Let's lastly talk about NDC internal politics. Is former President John Dramani Mahama, is he bound to contest the presidential primaries?
I don't want to use the word bound or use the word obliged. It's not an obligation. I believe that if anybody has served in just about any capacity in this country, it's President Mahama. In fact, he has an enviable record, and I'm hoping that very soon maybe we'll put him in the Guinness Book of Records for having served almost at every category of public office in Ghana, up to the high point of President of the Republic. So certainly he doesn't have to. But I believe that he's actually the very right man currently to lead the NDC. And you know, I don't form part even of the decision making, but the grassroots of our party is solidly behind President Mahama becoming a flag bearer once more.
That means you do not agree to assertions by others that there needs to be a new face to the flag bearership of the NDC?
That is open to a contest. So anybody is free to contest also. I don't believe that there's been any conversation by other people not contesting. You know, we are truly a very, very democratic party. You don't hear that our flag bearer or our leaders are sacking duly elected officers, as others have done. You don't hear that we've sidelined our party executive and we are working with other people. I believe that it is actually democracy of this party that also allows us all to decide who we want to lead us at any given time. So if it is President Mahama, then so be it. But I think it is not a personal thing for President Mahama. That much I know.
Suppose that Mahama wins the flag bearership. What do you think about who he should contest with in terms of vice presidency? You think that he should go back for Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman? Do you think a female should occupy that position, especially when there are calls for females to start moving high up the ladder?
No, I am personally first and foremost an advocate for everything female. I am not one of those who believes that there is any Ghanaian woman who is not ready for any office, be it president, vice president, or whatsoever. But I also believe that we ought to also respect the party guidelines and the party's constitution. Indeed, it is also the prerogative of the flag bearer at any time to make a choice of who his running mate should or ought to be. And I think that short of trying to preempt any such conversations or deliberations, I will leave that as solely within the preserve of President Mahama to do. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with Mr. Nana Jane Okokwajima. I think she's a fantastic individual, fantastic female leader, a trailblazer in her own right, and so she's qualified to occupy any position. But it's not in my place to say, it's not within my remit. I would endeavor to leave that absolutely in the hands of the good Lord, and of course in the hands of President Mahama and the party as and when the time comes.
Well, you've been advocating for women inclusion. You strongly stand for women and going up the ladder here in Ghana. Let's talk about Adwoa Safo. And she's been heavily contested in Parliament on issues of absenteeism. Do you think she's been handled properly? What do you think should be done with her in particular in Parliament?
Well, why do we have to reduce the conversation about Honorable Adwoa Safo to whether or not she's male or female? I think that whatever challenges she's facing have nothing to do with her sex, per se, or her gender. I think that could happen to a man or a woman. Indeed, there are two other men who are part of that clique of three of them who apparently have been absent from Parliament for way above the 15 days as prescribed by the Supreme Court. So I think that they all deserve to be treated in whatever way the Parliament deems fit. And we've been told that Parliament is actually master of its own rules. And on a matter of this, there's a strong ruling by the Supreme Court. And so I would not want to belabor the point and reduce it to a conversation about gender or otherwise. I would always maintain that whether male or female, once you're given a responsibility, you ought to step up to the plate, to do it to the best of your ability. But let not gender or sex be a reason why one person does it better than the other.
Okay, so let me end on this rather somewhat light note. Do you think of contesting for presidency anytime?
Actually, it's never even crossed my mind. But I believe that for now, I serve at the pleasure of John Dramani Mahama, and I'll be particularly very proud to see him elected once more to lead this country. So at least he can end on the high note on which he started.
Thank you very much for your time. And that was lawyer Joyce Bawah Mogtari giving us some updates on what to expect in case the NDC wins the 2024 general elections, as well as her assessment of the current governance system and the economy. This is Tough Jaw with me, Judith Awoche Tando.